risk. Byron serves as a youth leader in his church, coaches Little League, and volunteers on various service nonprofit boards and committees in Southwest Florida. He serves as chairman of the board for Child Evangelism Fellowship of Collier County. Concerned about the state of our debtor nation, Byron joined the Naples Tea Party in 2008 and became a member of the Naples Tea Party Leadership Council. It's my pleasure to present Byron Donald.
Just so everybody knows, I had to bring a timer with me. You know, if you give a politician room to just go ahead and talk, we'll just go on and on and on incessantly. So I want to make sure I'm keeping track of the time for you. My name is Byron Donald. I'm running for the United States Congress. So first of all, I want to thank you all for having me. I want to thank Rob for actually giving us the opportunity for me to come up here and speak with all of you this morning. You know, as I was driving up, you drive across the bridge and you drive through the island here. The one thing you understand about this island and really all of Southwest Florida and our country is that we live in a civil society. This is a society based upon moral order between all citizens. You know, we have visitors here in Sanibel right now from different parts of the country, different parts of the world. But when they come here to America, when they come here to Southwest Florida, there is a respect amongst all people. It's not overt. It's not on all of the airport check-in stations. It is just known and it's understood that here in this nation, despite the silliness that runs around in our news media, we have an understanding that mutual respect for each other, that voluntary exchange are crucial to the survival of this nation. Now, we have many problems in American society today. We all know it. We could probably all speak to them incessantly. Our national debt's $15.5 trillion. It's going to be $16 trillion by election day. We have $80 trillion plus in unfunded liabilities, depending on whatever economic growth forecast you choose to believe. Our education system is failing our kids. Our immigration system is a mess. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are unsustainable. Our tax system is an albatross. I can go on and on. The question for this race really isn't about which one of us can detail the problems. I think myself and all my opponents, we do a pretty good job of doing that. The question becomes, which one of us has the ability to do something about it in D.C. and throughout this nation? I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. I'm 33. I'm married. I have 3 young sons. They're 8, 4, and 10 months old. When I decided to get into this race, I honestly did it because I think our party needs champions for liberty. A lot of the problems in our nation today are because we have a great mass of voters who simply do not know about their politics. Plato once said, a people who are apathetic to their politics will be ruled by their inferiors. And he's right. Many of our citizens today, it's not that they're liberals or they're conservatives, they simply do not know or they simply do not care. And if we don't begin to have an engaged or electorate in our politics, we will lose this nation faster than we'll lose it to debt or to Al-Qaeda. That is the truth in American politics today. So what is required are men and women who have the ability to articulate a message of sovereignty, of limited government, of constitutionalism, of moral order, of voluntary exchange, to prove to all people that a free society, that a society based upon liberty is crucial to all Americans, especially the very poor. I'm a product of a single-parent household. My mother sacrificed and did all she could to make sure that I attended private institutions of learning, because she knew in the first grade that the public school system in New York City would fail me. There was times we struggled in life. I remember watching her, and I made a decision I would never struggle like that in my life. Something like that is only possible in a society that respects merit, that respects hard work. And that is what we are trying to protect as Republicans. I believe that the party needs a rebranding. I think it is time that we send leaders who not only understand the specific policy points, but are prepared to make the moral arguments for all of our policy positions. Because it is the moral argument that will speak to the hearts of voters, not the technical ones. I think we got to do a number of things when it comes to policy. The first is taxation. Now I know the big talk, the big mantra is we got to cut spending and cut spending now. And that's true. But if we want to unleash our economy, If we want to begin to change the current relationship between the individual and the federal government, we must have major tax reform, not nibbling around the margins. I am a supporter of the fair tax. I support it for one very important reason. Because right now in America, we all must justify our income to the federal government. The question of our tax system now is, who's the sovereign in this relationship? Who's the subject? Right now, I argue we are the subjects to the United States government. Today's April 7th. In 8 days, if you haven't filed already, you would have to tell the government how much money you made and how much you're going to pay taxes. And they tell you if that's justified or not. That is not the basis of American society as created. That's what it has become. The fair tax respects the individual's labor. It respects the fruits of that labor, for you to choose and to do for yourself, to spend your money how you see fit. And in the process of commerce, then you pay your taxes. That's a relationship argument. That's a moral argument for changing the tax code. It is immoral that the citizens of our nation have their money taken from them on the 1st and the 15th by the federal government. And the federal government doesn't even have the respect to pay us interest. The Chinese get interest, but we don't. How are we going to change our society back to one of liberty and of sovereignty if we cannot even get our tax code to respect a man's labor and his property? You know, in these arguments about the president's health care plan, Justice Kennedy said in the second day of arguments that this individual mandate changes the relationship between the individual and the people, between the individual and the federal government. I'm sorry. I argue that this is not the first time that's happened. It's actually the 4th time. The first time was with the 16th Amendment under Woodrow Wilson, creating the federal income tax, and by default the progressive income tax system we have today. The second was under Social Security and FDR. The third was the Great Society by Lyndon Johnson. And the fourth is now the President's health care plan. These have been assaults on the liberty of all people for the last 100 years. And the Republican Party better understand that history and send leaders who are prepared to combat it on those grounds. That's the argument I make for fair taxation in America. That is the argument I make for changing the tax code from what it currently is to a system that will not only respect a man's labor, but will produce between 7 and 10% per year in economic growth in the first year, according to several independent estimates. The fair tax tells foreign businesses you can come to America and earn tax-free. Do you know what a business would do if you tell them you can earn tax-free? They will be tripping over themselves to come do business in America. That is what we need, ladies and gentlemen. We don't need tax credits. We don't need refundable tax credits. We don't need the president, no matter if it's Barack Obama or George W. Bush, designing new tax policy for this business or for that sector or that industry. We need an open system that respects competition and respects merit, so that America can continue to be the society that is the exception to world history. That is the basis for arguing for major tax reform, for arguing for the fair tax, or even a flat tax if that's your natural bent. But we have to begin to lay that foundation for our people. And right now we don't. Now let's get to the hot button issue, spending. So everybody loves talking about spending. We're spending too much. We've got to cut spending. It's true. Republican Congressman Louis Gohmert of Texas has sponsored the last 4 Congresses ending baseline budgeting. Baseline budgeting allows the federal government's budget to increase between 5 and 8% per year just because. Just because. As individual citizens, we don't allow our budget to increase just because. I know I don't. That's illogical. Here's the argument for the government. Well, because we're living, our budgets have to increase. Therefore, you, the taxpayer, has to pay them. If I went to my boss and said, hey, you know what? My budget increases between 5 and 8% per year, so I'm going to need you guys to pay me more money every year to support that, they would laugh me out of the room. And they'd probably fire me. And they'd be justified in doing so. According to independent estimates, eliminating baseline budgeting and going to zero-based budgeting or family budgeting, as is commonly known, would decrease our long-term spending by $9.1 trillion. S&P wanted us to cut future spending by $4 trillion. Ending baseline budgeting is a 2-page bill. It passed in the House this year, and Harry Reid quickly tabled it. The problem is, he quickly tabled it and there was no Republican response. saying, listen, we want to get our federal budget under control going forward. And the way you do that is actually having a legitimate argument about spending. If I went into Congress next year and said, I want to cut $100 billion a year, I want to cut $1 trillion over 10 years, it's like that's how they like to say it, I'm cutting $1 trillion. That's cutting $100 billion in future spending that has never been spent in world history. The next time the president or Debbie Wasserman Schultz or Nancy Pelosi or Harry Reid try to say, oh, well, you just want to cut spending on the back of the poor. I say, in 1992, I was poor. My mother was on public assistance, and we had no problems getting it. So you can't tell me that cutting spending back to 2008 levels or 2003 levels is balancing the budget on the backs of the poor. You assume the poor never got assistance before in American history, until right now. So your argument is flawed. This is the way we have to have our dialogue in the public arena. Not arguing the specific nuances of spending, making the moral argument for cutting spending in America. Secondly, I think we have to have cut, cap, and balance. The truth is we don't have any money. Let's just be honest, folks. We don't have any money. We send anywhere between $2.2 to $2.5 trillion in taxes to Washington every year. You know, real quick, I'm going to jump back to tax rates for a moment. I make an argument tax rates don't matter. If you look back at the tax rates, at the amount of income that the federal government receives going back to 1960, on average, the government receives 18% of GDP in tax revenue. That is the dreaded Bush tax cuts. That is the tax rates under Bill Clinton that everybody left of center loves today. That is Reagan's tax rates before and after 1986. That's Gerald Ford. That's Jimmy Carter. 18% of GDP. So tax rates don't matter. What matters are economic results. What matters is GDP growth. Now the argument about spending is we have to cut spending to stimulate our economy. I'm going to be honest with you, that's a false argument. Cutting spending today does nothing for GDP growth. It does something for GDP growth in the medium to long term. Because it shows our financial markets that we're not going to put an additional burden on our businesses here at home and on our people. So we have a two-step process in DC. We have to have major tax reform, and we have to have major spending reform. But those aren't the only problems. Let me go on. Obamacare. I believe that the individual mandate will fall. If you listen to the arguments of the Justice of the Supreme Court in Day 2, it is apparent that even Justice Kennedy understands how much of a disaster the individual mandate is. But I do have some news that we need to be very, very careful about. The Day 3 argument, the argument on severability, is more important than the Obamacare, than the mandate argument. Because without the individual mandate, that bill will become an albatross on our federal budget, and it will become an albatross on our insurance companies. Because now there's no mandate telling people they have to buy the coverage, but the insurance companies still have to cover you. What will an average person do when they realize I don't have to buy a stitch of insurance except when I get sick? They're not going to buy insurance for one simple reason. It's man's nature. If you understand the writings of John Locke in the Essays of Human Understanding, you know men will always seek their own interests. That's what we do best. It's not selfish, it's what is. And our government has to understand and respect man's nature. That's why the entire bill must fall. But even if we repeal Obamacare, even if the Supreme Court strikes it down, what are we going to do with health insurance? It still needs major reform. Our current healthcare delivery system is out of World War II. It's 2012. We're using a delivery system based out of World War II America because men went off to war. And we had to figure out a way to ensure the women who were behind and their children. Oh, let the employers do it. That was the answer. And we never changed it. I argue if you're going to lower healthcare costs in America, what you have to do is you have to eliminate the tax subsidy for businesses and give that same tax break benefit to individuals. Of course, if we don't adopt the fair tax, that will solve all those problems. However, if we do not enact the fair tax, you have to allow a person to buy their own health insurance with pre-tax dollars. People must have care and concern for those dollars. Personally, that's how you drive down the cost of care. You don't do it by having businesses subsidize health insurance for their employers. for their employees. As an employee, I have no care and concern for how much my company paid for their insurance because I don't pay it. And they have no care for concern of how much I use it because they're not there in the doctor's office with me. This is why you have to change that entire tax argument from business to individual. People must have care and concern for their dollars. Milton Friedman said, and he's 100% right, there are 4 ways to spend money. The most efficient way you spend money is when you spend your money on yourself because you have more care and concern for those dollars. The most inefficient way you spend money is when you spend somebody else's money on somebody else. That's what Medicare does. That's what Social Security does. That's what Medicaid does. Quite frankly, that's what most health insurance does today. I am spending my employer's money on my doctor. It's not my money, it's the employer's money because he did not give it to me. He didn't give it to me in exchange for my labor. If people are responsible for buying their own care, for buying their own health insurance, for paying the cost of their doctors, they will think twice about what they're actually doing with their doctors. There will be more care and concern. The second part of healthcare reform is Medicare. Medicare and Medicaid is where the cost shifting comes from. It's not from the long-term uninsured. It's really not from those who go to emergency rooms. That's only 2%. It's only 1.5% of all health insurance dollars spent, healthcare dollars spent in this nation. It's Medicare and it's Medicaid that are the problems. Medicare and Medicaid undercut the cost of care for seniors and for the poor. If you go in for an x-ray and say, here's this x-ray, Medicare or Medicaid will only pay that doctor $80, even if the x-ray costs $100. And so what happens? When I go in, he charges my insurance company $125 because he has to make up the cost that the federal government refuses to pay. When it comes to Medicare reform, I think what Paul Ryan started to say is correct. We do have to go to a payment subsidized system where we give that voucher, if they want to call it, and I'm not afraid to call it a voucher because that's exactly what it's going to be. A voucher to that person who is on Medicare. Here is the amount of dollars we have allocated towards you. Now it is your responsibility to allocate those dollars effectively. That's how you drive down the cost of care in America. It's really the only way. It's the same way we drive down the cost for iPads or for coffee pots. Voluntary exchange. That's how you do it. And that's what would happen in medicine today if you made those changes. On education, we have to eliminate the Department of Education. Let's be perfectly honest, it's been a disaster. It's been a disaster ever since it was instituted. There's no benefit that can be found on any measure for our kids. But more often than that, bigger than that, it is impossible for a federal politician to design education policy for 100 million kids. Because I don't know. Listen, if you go to the microphone and say, I want to take apart the Department of Education, that parent who just gets home at 6 p.m. from work, has their kids, tries to make sure they do their homework and they get on the bed so they can finally relax. When they turn on Nightline for 30 seconds and hear that you want to get rid of the Department of Education, they're going to fear you. They're not going to want anything to do with you. They're like, this guy's nuts. My kids need education. What we have to make is the moral argument. It is impossible for a federal politician to design education policy because we don't know these kids. We don't know what motivates them. We don't know what their strengths are. We don't know what their weaknesses are. But the teachers in those classrooms, they know. The principals in those schools, they know. And it is the responsibility of local citizens to control their school boards who should be designing education policy for these kids. If the federal government does it, we're going to waste your money and your kids will not learn anything. We'll give them testing and they'll just teach them to the test. And what's happening today in our educational system? I work with teenagers, like we said. In my opinion, our teenagers have cow eyes. They're dull. There's no critical thinking going on in there. Only for a very few who are motivated and pushed by their parents, as they should be. But most of our kids are not being taught to their best interests, to their unique, specific bent. They're being taught to the test. They're being taught to check A, B, C, D, or E. And if all else fails, the answer is C. That's what our kids are learning. That's not going to prepare them for the jobs of tomorrow. That's not going to prepare them for the green jobs the president loves to talk about. How are we going to compete in the world of tomorrow if the Chinese and the Indians and the Koreans are teaching their kids how to think critically and are grinding them to the stone, and while our kids are learning about FCATs and state regents exams. That's not going to work. Education must be local. That's the only way it can work, because people are unique. And our government and our leaders have to have an understanding that since all men are unique, it is impossible for them to think that they know best, because they're not smart enough. I think I'm pretty intelligent. But the collective intelligence of everybody in this room far exceeds mine. And since I know that, how am I going to design policy that says otherwise? On immigration, I think we got to do a couple things. Number one, I think we have to end birthright citizenship as it exists today. If you're going to be a citizen in the United States of America going forward, one of your parents must be a duly noted citizen of the United States, simply because we have a welfare state. And open immigration cannot succeed with a welfare state. You have to choose one. You can't have both. It's a far cry from how immigration used to be in America. You came here knowing there was no help for you. And you made for it whatever you wanted to, but at least you knew you had a chance. Today, with illegal immigration, and also let me also add to that, the fact that we have people who are coming into our country through businesses, who are basically operating as hotels for foreign nationals to have their children here in America, just so their children can have citizenship, and then they go back to wherever they came from, is ludicrous. At the same time, we're educating Chinese citizens, we're educating Indian citizens, we're educating kids from Europe in engineering, in physics, in science, and they can't stay here in America? We're sending them back home? I work with a lawyer in my office. She's a trained lawyer from Germany. She's very intelligent. She's on a 3-year stint. They can send her back at any time, and they don't have to renew her visa. That's just completely wrong. If we want to have an immigration system that suits American interests, we change birthright citizenship, we eliminate some of the welfare benefits for being in this country illegally, and we revamp this work visa program. Last part of illegal immigration, I don't think that you can have mass deportation. I don't think it works. I can't think logistically how that's going to come together. I do believe in a guest worker program. For those people who remain in this country, after they self-deport, because they will, after they self-deport, those who remain, that show that they have the ability to provide for them and their families that are here, we give them guest worker status and put them to the back of the line. That's the way you do it. Mass deportation, in my view, simply isn't going to work. It sounds nice, but the federal government can't get rid of the $100 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicare anywhere. How are they going to deport 16 million illegals? Seriously. How's that going to happen? Simply can't. I talked about a lot of issues this morning. But now I'm going to talk about the real issue in this race. For all the problems that we have, all the solutions that I bring to the table, that my opponents bring to the table, the truth of the matter is, none of that's going to matter if our leaders cannot begin to articulate this vision to all people. Going to Congress, going to Washington, and making sausage is not going to solve our problems today. That's part of it. But the other job is, our congressman has to have the ability to reach all voters. I had a lunch with a lady from the NAACP in Naples. And at the end of our conversation, she was doing two things. First of all, she was agreeing with me. She knows I'm a conservative. She knows I'm a Republican. And she was agreeing with me. Why? Because she was hearing me. And she made a point. She said, there's a county commissioner in Naples, and he's a Republican. And she said, do you know why we vote for him? I was like, why? She goes, because we see him. Because he comes. Even though we know he's a Republican, we know that he comes and he cares about what's going on in our community. A week ago, I was invited to a vigil for this whole Trayvon Martin situation in East Naples. It was a candlelight vigil. And the gentleman who put it together are from a group called Collier Men of Character. They're good men. I knew where their hearts were at when they asked me, so I said I would go. My wife said to me, why are you going to this? You see what's going on in the news media. And I told her, our party cannot just leave this playing ground to the likes of Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson. If you look around the world, if you look at Egypt today, when there is a vacuum of leadership, something will always fill it. And in the history of our party, we have allowed that void to be filled by men like Al Sharpton, by men like Barack Obama, by women like Nancy Pelosi. We have refused to enter the battleground and make the moral arguments for liberty and freedom here in America. To educate those kids that responsibility is crucial to their future. When I'm in this race, I make the argument we don't need legislators. We need statesmen. When you go on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, ABC, the Sunday shows, it doesn't really matter. Nobody cares what your war chest is. Nobody's going to care that you're the name we know out of Southwest Florida. Nobody's going to care about any of those things. Do you make the arguments for liberty? Do you make the arguments that will preserve America for the next 100 years? That is the vision the Republican Party must have if we are going to be successful. I believe if you can change 5% of the I don't knows that will never come into a room like this, you could change the country. But you don't do that by making sausage. You do that by making the arguments for limited constitutional government. You do that for making the arguments for moral order, for a civil society, and for voluntary exchange, not greedy capitalism. Those are the principles that have made America the exception in world history. And those are the principles that will make America to continue to be that exception for the next 100 years. You know, the core argument in this entire race, not just the presidential race, but even this congressional race, is the role of government in America. All the problems I talked about are merely symptoms of the overall problem. The role of government in America is off from its original intent. How do we convince the general electorate, not Republicans, not conservatives, not even liberals, they're never going to agree with us. How do we convince the general electorate that our way is the way? You do it by making the moral argument for their lives, not the policy argument. The living and breathing Constitution is really the basis of all our problems. You see it on the Supreme Court right now. We have 4 justices who believe that the Constitution can be changed by fiat by a small group of men. We have others who believe, rightly, that the Constitution is a foundation and cannot just simply be altered by the whim of men. I would think that everybody in this room believes that the living and breathing Constitution is ridiculous. That the Constitution is a foundation for American society. But let's put the Constitution aside and look at the foundation of a building. Can the foundation of this building change its very nature depending if it's hot or cold or rainy or windy? It's ridiculous. Because it would inhibit our ability to do what we wish, to come here and listen to a congressional candidate talk, to go upstairs and read books in the library, to simply come in here and relax, play cards, do whatever the human heart desires. How then can it be that the foundation of our society can be changed at the whim of a politician or group of politicians? It's illogical. That instability limits the ability of men. That instability stops us from doing what we wish. That instability is what countless people have lived under throughout world history. So that it is no question that the greatest achievement of man in the history of the world happened here, where the rule of law was stable to allow for the liberty of men. When was the last time you heard a Republican talk like that? Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Byron Donalds. I'm running for the United States Congress. I'm in this race. My last point, and I'll open it to the floor for any questions you have. My last point is simple. When you make your selection on August 14th, keep in mind, we have a country to save. Who's going to do that? Thank you. Now I'll open it to any questions you might have.
Oh, thank you. You know, the other day I was talking to some friends, and what I heard was the whole conversation went from concern that the Obamacare was going to tell the Catholic Church what they could do and go against their conscience. Okay, and we all heard that conversation. Okay, but the thought was it's changed now. The wordsmiths in the Democratic Party somehow figured out that if they would change the subject to like women's health care.
Mm-hmm.
And then the conversation went from, we are going to give you your birth control and that at no charge. And then the conversation went to, these were women's health issues. Now it was like a sacred discussion. This one thought came to my mind, first of all, was being, sometimes I get distracted, was how could this discussion go from a religious discussion to like something like this. But the other side of it was, if you had a need for like this, these healthcare issues and that to be addressed in that, some women were buying into this. And the concern was, they keep beating the drum. I get these emails. They keep beating the drum every day. The Republicans, terrible people, they're trying to, destroy women's health care. They don't care about the women. Women need to have a stronger voice in Washington. And the biggest discussion also was, it would make us look better if we would kind of yield to this thought and allow this part of the health care to continue, so that they could take this very inexpensive, I think, cost of for birth control and that, and just pass it on to the insurance company. And my thoughts, what do you think about that? Where you actually you say to them, well, for us to get along, we're going to go and try to be a part of it, and because the election is so important for us to win and get rid of this guy, Obama and Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi and some of those others, we should just allow this thing to happen and support that part. What do you think about that?
I completely disagree with that.
Very good. I like that. So I disagree too, by the way.
I was at the small buggy races about 2 months ago in Naples, and I was speaking to this one lady. She was a Democrat, and I asked her to sign my petition. I said, well, I'm trying to get on the ballot. Would you sign my petition? She said, absolutely not. I disagree with you Republicans. I said, ma'am, I've never been in political office before. I'm not one of these Republicans. Well, you're against women's contraception. I said, ma'am, the president made that an issue. No Republican made this whole contraception issue a problem. Yes, because he's looking out for women. No, he's not looking out for women. He's looking out for him. He is superimposing his value system on all Americans, no matter if they agree or disagree. Put the Catholic Church aside for a moment. It is a religious liberty issue, but put the Catholic Church aside for a moment. No president, whether it's Obama or George W. Bush, has the authority to tell you, an individual citizen, what you must cover in your health insurance policy. No president should have that authority. And she kind of looked at me stone-faced. Well, you're just against women. Ma'am, I'm for all people. I'm for liberty. If a president has the ability to tell you this, what can't he do? That's the question you got to ask yourself. And honestly, that is the type of rhetoric that has to be had in our politics from our side. A lot of people feel that we got to get away from the rhetoric and just get back to policy. Folks, we've been getting the policy for 80 years in America. We have ignored the rhetoric. Let's be perfectly honest here. We have had men and women in our party who have been all about the policy for 80 years in America, and we have ignored rhetoric. But what we fail to realize is faith comes by hearing. In the Bible, it's faith comes by hearing and hearing the Word of God. But faith comes by hearing. And most of our citizens hear equality, social justice, hates women, hates the poor, loves the rich. They don't hear, no, liberty. That what the president wants to do in all his generosity is really coerce you into his viewpoint. That's what the left really wants. You can't disagree with the left or you hate women. Our guys don't say these things. That, in my view, is just as important as the policy you put on the floor. And floor speeches from the House aren't enough because nobody watches them. Let's just be honest, nobody watches those things. So, people inside politics do. People who count balls and strikes, they watch those. The average citizen doesn't. The average citizen has heard a 30-second clip from Debbie Wasserman Schultz how Republicans hate women. Where is our 30-second clip saying that Barack Obama hates people? Because he has no respect for their liberty and their sovereignty as citizens. That his value system should not superimpose the people of this nation because he is not a king. We fought a revolution over that. That's the answer. you had a quick point about the economic argument about the cost of contraception going down. That's just wrong. It's just a fallacy. The reason why birth control in Walmart is as cheap as it is because of voluntary exchange. If you put it through a government system, the cost of contraception will rise on the very women you are trying to protect. Why? How can we say this? Because that's what's happened with everything else in healthcare that the government has touched. The cost of it has risen because they're using Milton Friedman's fourth lesson on spending money. It is inefficient to spend somebody else's money on somebody else. That's the argument. Yes, sir.
I got two things. First, I agree with you on the healthcare issue and having the piles given to the people to use them. My question is, while most people who have, integrity and so forth and so on, will do it right, what do you do with the ones who don't? They wind up sick and they don't have any health care. They come out to our emergency rooms and we get charged.
That's right. Well,
that's why
I made the point. The first point is understanding that the people who don't buy insurance and go to emergency rooms, that's a minute part of the overall health system. It really is. I think that at this point in American history, everybody cares about the poor. We really do. If you look back at the history before the welfare state, our greatest charities were created. That's when they were created. Because people of means saw that there were people with not, and they couldn't stand by in good conscience, in moral order, and let that happen. And so our greatest charities were created. They're not being created today because the government has assumed that role. And that simply can't be going forward. Now, going back to your point, I believe that if you actually have a voluntary exchange of healthcare services and insurance, the cost will come down enough to even those who really kind of don't care will buy enough of it. You have that problem in auto insurance today, where there are people who buy their auto insurance just to make sure they can renew their tags, and they don't pay it anymore. And we have uninsured insurance to take care of that. It's not a disaster to the auto insurance issue, but it is an issue, and there's always going to be no grand fixes. What we have to do is lay the foundation so that the most people can achieve their ends. We're never going to get all of them. We just never are, because people, I'll say it right now, you cannot legislate people from being stupid. You just can't do it. You have to provide the foundation so that most people can thrive. If you do that with restraint, you are doing the necessary things of government to allow all people to succeed in America. Your second
thing was, have you read Suicide of a Superpower?
I haven't read it, but I've heard about it.
That's good.
All right.
And it's the first couple of 100 pages, and you begin to wonder if you should go and jump off the bridge. And the last 50
Not the
pages,
Brooklyn Bridge. The bridge.
Well, I mean, from Brooklyn, And the last 50 pages give you, is pretty much what you said. And finally, I don't see why you don't have a TV camera here and get some of these few minutes of your speech on the website.
Oh, actually, we did.
She's
actually recording right now.
I got you on. I got you on there.
The next question is, now you're going to do 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. You got a whole series of things here you can do. I hope you're doing it.
No, we are.
If you are, you're the only one.
Good. I'm going to take you your hand. Go ahead.
I'm in sympathy with your moral issues and positions on this, but as Congressman, how would you begin to implement something that would effectuate these moral issues in a positive way? How would you do that?
Well,
would you introduce some kind of legislation, this one specifically, that says don't spend money for contraception? Well, how? What would you do?
Well, I think what you got to do, honestly, is you can't try to attack them as individual segments. I think just when you're going to design something like healthcare, what you do is you put out the healthcare plan. You put out the whole thing. I don't think you do it piecemeal, because you lose any momentum you might have gained. But if you do that in Congress, yes, you produce whatever plan I talk about. You put the legal parameters around that, and you introduce that piece of legislation. Of course, you have to work with your fellow men and women in the Congress. However, there's a difference between cooperation and capitulation. So I will cooperate with you if we have a mutual end. I'm not going to capitulate to you if the premise of your argument is in opposition to mine. That's when, in my view, it goes back to the electorate. A lot of the things I talk about, these are policy positions to preserve the nation for 100 years. In my view, some of them may not happen in my first term, but you have to begin to fight for them today in order to get them in 5 years and 10 years. A perfect example is oil drilling. 20 years ago, we were told, oh, we can't drill for oil, you'll never see it. It will take 20 years to get there. Well, if we had started 20 years ago, we'd have it today. Even the president, oh, these drill here, drill out people, if they talk about that, we won't get that stuff for 6 years. If we had started 6 years ago, we would have it today. That's how we have to begin these battles. I'm not going to tell you, if you vote for me, we're going to change America in my first term. That's ridiculous. You're not being ridiculous. I'm saying that thought process is. My view is this is an 80-year process. And it's going to take re-education of the electorate. It's going to take strong policy positions in the House and more importantly in the Senate in order to move the country where we need to go. In terms of Congress, putting in those different pieces of legislation, I don't think you go piecemeal. I think you play out your foundation and you let the left attack it because that's what they're going to do. You just got to be prepared to have a counter argument and a counter vision for people so that they can choose what America they want. That's the way I look at it. Sir?
Byron, I agree with many of your points. On the overall healthcare cost issue in this country, almost any news program anymore, whether it's Fox, NBC, ABC, they're all saying, they all have these sound bites about